Welcome to Fallout HOA. I'm Michael Vincent. Today, I'm going to tell you about Ryan Cooper, a man who discovered the HOA president had broken into his home while he was away on business. She didn't know Ryan had security cameras, and she definitely didn't know there was a pit bull named Bruno waiting in the bedroom. But this isn't a revenge story. This isn't about letting the dog loose. This is about how an ordinary homeowner used evidence, procedure, and patience to bring down someone who thought her title made her untouchable. If you've ever felt powerless against people who hide behind community guidelines to control others, this one's for you. And if you stick around until the end, I've got a checklist every homeowner needs, but most never see. Let's get into it.
I was 3 states away, sitting in my mother's living room in Ohio, when my phone buzzed. The notification read, "Motion detected, front door." I figured it was a package, maybe a neighbor walking too close to the porch. I swiped it open anyway. The way you check your rearview mirror, even when you know nothing's there. The live feed loaded, and I stopped breathing. A woman stood in my foyer, not outside, inside. She was maybe late 50s, wearing a navy blazer like she was headed to a board meeting. In her left hand, a clipboard. In her right, a pen. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't looking around nervously. She moved through my house like she owned it, like she had every right to be there. I didn't recognize her at first. I'd only been in the neighborhood 2 years, and I kept to myself. Work took me out of town most weeks, but then I saw the way she tilted her head at my bookshelf, the way she ran her finger along the edge of my kitchen counter and checked it for dust. That posture, that confidence. I'd seen it once before. At the HOA annual meeting I attended out of obligation, Linda Ashford, president of the Homeowners Association. The woman who sent violation letters, the way some people send holiday cards. And now she was standing in my living room, alone, uninvited, while I watched through a camera 1,000 miles away. Bruno started barking. I could hear it through the camera's microphone, that deep. Guttural warning bark he only used for strangers. He was in the bedroom. I always kept him there when I traveled. Door closed, food and water set up, a dog walker scheduled twice a day. Safe, contained. Linda paused at the hallway, staring at the bedroom door. Bruno's barking grew louder, more frantic. She didn't flinch. She just lifted her clipboard and wrote something down. Then she took a photo of the door with her phone, my bedroom door, from inside my house. She stood there for a long moment, listening to him bark, and I could almost see the calculation behind her eyes. Whatever she was documenting, Bruno had just become part of it. Every instinct told me to activate the two-way speaker, to shout, to demand an explanation, but I knew exactly how that would play out. Linda would pivot before I finished my first sentence. She'd say she knocked and got worried. She'd say the HOA had authority to inspect for violations. She'd have a story polished before any cop arrived, and when they did, they'd call it a civil matter and tell me to take it up with the board. I'd be the hysterical homeowner who overreacted. She'd be the concerned community leader doing her job. People like Linda don't panic when confronted. They prepare. I needed her to be comfortable. I needed her to show me exactly what she was looking for. So I kept my mouth shut and let the cameras run. She opened my kitchen cabinets, one by one. She checked under the sink. She photographed my windows, my baseboards, and the vent above my stove. At one point, she walked into the guest bathroom and stayed there for nearly 2 minutes. The hallway camera caught her going in and coming out, but nothing in between. I hadn't installed coverage in there, never saw the need. When she emerged, she was writing again. That clipboard never left her hand. 47 minutes. That's how long she stayed. 47 minutes of walking through my home, touching my things, documenting pieces of my life I never consented to share, the whole time. I sat frozen on my mother's couch, phone trembling slightly in my grip, watching a stranger treat my home like a crime scene she was building from scratch. When she finally left, she locked the front door behind her. I watched her punch in the code, and that's when it clicked. Last spring. I'd had a contractor install new gutters. The HOA required pre-approval for exterior work, so I'd submitted the paperwork through their management company. Part of that paperwork included temporary access information for the crew. I'd given them the code and never thought twice about it. Apparently, that code had made its way into the wrong hands, or maybe the right hands, depending on how Linda saw it. She walked down my driveway without looking back. No hesitation, no guilt, just the calm, measured steps of someone who believed she was above consequence. Bruno was still barking. I could hear him through the camera, confused and agitated, wondering why a stranger had walked through his home, and why I hadn't come to help. I bought this house after my divorce, picked it because it was small and quiet and mine. I refinished the hardwood floors myself because I wanted to earn it, not just own it. Every wall, every corner, every square foot I'd made it mean something. And now, this woman had walked through it all like she was appraising a repo. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to fly home and confront her on her own doorstep. But anger is what people like Linda count on. They want you loud. They want you sloppy. They want you to hand them the narrative. I wasn't going to give her that. Not yet. I closed the app, opened a new folder on my phone, named it Evidence, and started downloading every second of footage. If Linda Ashford wanted to play by the rules, I'd learn the rules better than she ever had. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda Ashford standing in my hallway, clipboard raised, photographing my bedroom door while Bruno barked himself hoarse on the other side. By 2 a.m, I stopped pretending rest was coming. I grabbed my laptop, sat against the headboard, and started looking for the document that gave her the right to do what she did. If it existed, I needed to see it. If it didn't, I needed proof. I started with the email. 3 weeks earlier, the HOA management company had sent a message with the subject line, Notice of Annual Inspection. I'd archived it without a second thought, filed it away with reminders about trash can placement and pool hours. In my mind, inspection meant someone walking the neighborhood, checking lawns and fences, exterior compliance, curb appeal. The email didn't say interior. It didn't say we will enter your home. It didn't mention access to private residences at all. Just a date range and the word inspection. No specifics, no boundaries. The kind of language that could mean anything or nothing depending on who was interpreting it. And that vagueness, I realized, wasn't careless. It was strategic. It let people like Linda fill in the blanks however they wanted. I pulled up the CC&R next, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The document every homeowner in a planned community signs at closing. I'd signed mine 2 years ago without reading a single page. I was still raw from the divorce back then, running on caffeine and survival mode, desperate to close on something that felt like a fresh start. The house wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine, the first thing I'd owned alone in over a decade. I remember sitting at the title company, exhausted and hollowed out, signing wherever the notary pointed. 47 pages of fine print I'd agreed to blindly because I didn't have the energy to question anything. That decision was coming back to haunt me now. I made a pot of coffee and settled in. Article 1, definitions. Article 2, membership obligations. Article 3, architectural guidelines. I forced myself to read every clause, every subsection, every footnote buried in legalese. Most of it was mundane rules about fence heights, approved paint colors, restrictions on commercial vehicles and driveways, but Article 9 made me sit up straight. Article 9 covered inspections. The language was specific. The HOA had the right to inspect exterior portions of any property to ensure compliance with community standards. Exterior. I read the clause 3 times. There was nothing authorizing board members to enter a private residence without written consent from the homeowner. Not a single line. The word interior didn't appear anywhere in the section. Article 12 addressed emergency access gas leaks, burst pipes, fire hazards, situations where immediate entry might prevent harm to the community. Even then, the rules were tight. The board had to document the emergency within 24 hours. They had to notify the homeowner in writing. They had to file a report with the management company. I checked my email again. No emergency notice. I checked the HOA portal. No incident report. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No voicemails. No texts. Linda had walked through my house for 47 minutes without a single piece of documentation to justify it. The CC&R didn't protect what she did. Nothing did. I almost called her. I had her number from the HOA directory, and I sat there with my thumb over the screen, ready to demand an explanation. But confronting her now would only give her time to prepare. She'd been president for 6 years. She knew how to control a narrative. If I came at her emotionally and half-cocked, she'd already be spinning the story before I finished my first sentence. I put the phone down and poured another cup of coffee. The anger would still be there tomorrow. Right now, I need to think. Instead of calling, I worked. I created a folder on my laptop named CCNR Analysis. I copied every relevant article into a single document. I highlighted the clauses that mattered: exterior inspection only, emergency protocols, notification requirements. Then I built a comparison chart, what the CCNR authorized versus what Linda had actually done. The gap wasn't ambiguous, it was absolute. No clause covered her entry, no exception applied. The document I'd signed gave the HOA authority over my lawn, my fence, and my exterior paint color. It did not give Linda Ashford the right to walk through my living room and photograph my bedroom door. By sunrise, the folder had grown. Screenshots of the inspection email, exported footage from the cameras, a timeline mapping every minute Linda spent inside my house against every clause in the CCNR that she'd ignored. I organized the files by date, then by category: evidence, communications, legal analysis, 3 folders, 3 angles, 1 case. My eyes burned from staring at the screen all night, but for the first time since that notification buzzed on my phone, I didn't feel helpless. I booked an earlier flight home, packed my bag while my mother was still asleep, left a note on the kitchen counter saying I had a work emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. This was work now, the kind that required focus, patience, and documentation. The kind that didn't leave room for anger or mistakes. Linda Ashford had entered my home, believing no one would check the fine print. She was wrong. I had the receipts. I had the rules. And I was just getting started. The flight home felt longer than any trip I'd taken for work. I spent most of it scrolling through my evidence folder, looking for holes in my own logic. By the time the plane touched down, I had the CCNR memorized. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, the house looked the same as always: small, quiet, unremarkable. But the place I'd bought as a fresh start now felt like a crime scene I was returning to document. Bruno nearly knocked me over when I opened the door. He jumped and whined and pressed his head against my leg like he was trying to tell me everything that had happened while I was gone. I knelt and let him lean against me, feeling the tension slowly leave his body. He'd been alone with a stranger in his home, and he didn't understand why. I walked through the room slowly, noticing small things. The filing cabinet in my office sat slightly open. I always kept it closed. The shoes in my closet were arranged differently. The TV remote rested on the left side of the coffee table instead of the right. Nothing was missing, but everything had been touched. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The CCNR told me what Linda wasn't allowed to do. Now I needed to prove she hadn't done what she was required to do. If this had been a legitimate inspection, there would be documentation. I started with the HOA portal. Meeting minutes were archived going back 3 years. I pulled up every record from the past 6 months and searched for my address. Nothing, not a single mention, no discussion of violations, no notes about follow-up action. According to the official record, Linda's visit had never happened. I checked my email next. If the inspection had turned up anything, the management company should have sent a follow-up notice within 7 days. That was the rule. You inspect, you document, you notify. I scrolled through every HOA message since I'd moved in, reminders about dues, landscaping updates, a parking warning from last year's block party, but nothing about an inspection at my address, no violation letter, no request for remediation, no acknowledgement that Linda had been inside my home at all. The next morning, I called the management company. A woman named Patricia answered, polite and professional. I kept my tone calm and requested a copy of the inspection report for my property, dated 10 days ago. She put me on hold, then came back sounding confused. I'm not showing any inspection report on file for that date. Are you sure about the timing? I told her I was certain. She checked again. Same result. There's no record of an inspection at your address in our system. If one was conducted, it wasn't logged with us. I thanked her and hung up. Then I opened my phone's voice memo app. I was in a one-party consent state. I called back, asked the same questions, and recorded every word. Patricia confirmed it again, no report. No record, no documentation of any kind. So here's where it stood. The meeting minutes showed nothing. The email chain showed nothing. The management company's system showed nothing. Linda Ashford had spent 47 minutes inside my home, and according to every official record that existed, it had never happened. Not a clerical error, not a filing delay, nothing. I wasn't ready to call the police. I know how that sounds. A woman broke into my house, why not report it immediately? But if I called now, with just the footage and my interpretation of the CC&R, I'd be gambling on a cop who might not understand HOA procedures. Linda would claim authorized inspection. The police would see a civil dispute and tell me to sort it out with the board. She'd know I was coming, and she'd have time to fabricate paperwork, backdate a report, rally the other board members. I'd lose the one advantage I had. She didn't know I was watching. I needed more. Not just proof that she'd entered without authorization, I had that. I needed to know if this was a one-time overreach or something she'd done before. If I were the only target, this was trespassing. If there were others, this was a pattern, and patterns are harder to explain away. I saved Patricia's recorded confirmation and added it to the evidence folder, updated my timeline with the new data points. 3 sources checked, 3 sources are empty. The documentation that should have existed didn't exist because Linda never intended to create it. This wasn't an inspection that went wrong. This was something she'd done deliberately, quietly, counting on no one checking the records she was supposed to file. I closed my laptop and looked at Bruno, who had settled on his bed in the corner, watching me with tired eyes. "We're not done yet," I told him. He didn't understand the words, but he thumped his tail once against the floor anyway. I had the footage, I had the CC&R, I had 3 empty record systems that proved Linda hadn't followed a single procedure, but I still didn't know why. What was she looking for? Why my house? Why me? The next morning, I decided to find out if I was alone in this. I started with Jim Holloway, the retired electrician who lived 4 houses down. He'd been in the neighborhood 15 years longer than anyone else on the block. If something strange had been happening with the HOA, Jim would know. I walked over and knocked on his door, not sure what I was hoping to hear. What he told me changed everything.
I'm Michael Vincent, and if you were Ryan right now, standing at the edge of something bigger than you expected, would you keep digging? Or would you take what you have and hope it's enough? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's see whose instincts are sharpest. Now, let's find out what Jim knows.
Jim Holloway answered the door in a flannel shirt and reading glasses, a mug of coffee in one hand. He was 72, retired after 40 years as an electrician, and he had lived in this neighborhood longer than most of the trees on the street. I'd waved to him a few times since moving in, but never had a real conversation. When I told him I had questions about Linda Ashford, his expression shifted from polite curiosity to something harder. He stepped aside and waved me in. "I was wondering when someone would finally ask," he said. We sat at his kitchen table, and Jim told me what happened 18 months ago. He'd gone to visit his daughter in Oregon for 2 weeks. When he came back, his filing cabinet had been opened. Papers on his desk were out of order. A window he always kept locked was unlocked. He found a notice tucked into his mailbox, not mailed, just placed there from the HOA, dated 3 days before his return. It cited a water damage inspection due to a reported leak. No leak was ever found. No report was ever filed. When Jim called the management company, they had no record of any inspection at his address. I asked if he'd confronted Linda. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I went to the next board meeting, asked about it publicly. She said I must have misremembered the notice. Said the HOA doesn't conduct interior inspections without consent. He paused. Made me feel like a senile old man in front of the whole room. I dropped it after that. He looked up at me. But I know what I saw. I know that window was locked. Jim gave me 2 more names. Megan Porter, the flight attendant in the corner house, and George and Betty Sullivan, the retired couple who winter in Florida. I found Megan the next evening, still in her airline uniform, rolling a suitcase up her driveway. When I mentioned Linda's name, her face tightened. She invited me inside without hesitation. Her story added a new dimension. She'd come home from a work rotation to find her back door unlocked. She'd actually filed a police report, the only one among us who had nothing stolen, no forced entry, case closed within a week. What made her account different was the detail about access. Linda has a master key to the back gates, Megan said, for emergencies, supposedly, community maintenance. I never questioned it until now. A master key, not a code shared with a contractor. Direct access to the rear of every property in the neighborhood. The Sullivans confirmed the pattern without adding new evidence. George remembered coming back from Florida to find kitchen drawers rearranged. Betty mentioned a closet door left open that she always kept closed. Neither had reported anything. Neither had connected it to the HOA. They'd assumed age, forgetfulness, maybe a house sitter they'd forgotten about. When I explained what I'd found, Betty's face went pale. She came to welcome us when we first moved in, she said quietly. Brought cookies, asked all about our travel schedule, 5 households, 5 instances of unauthorized entry over 2 years. I built a chart that night, mapping each case by date, duration of absence, and signs of intrusion. The pattern was surgical. Jim was elderly and lived alone, easy to dismiss as confused. Megan traveled constantly for work, easy to blame on fatigue or distraction. The Sullivans spent half the year out of state, easy to attribute to failing memory. I was new, unfamiliar with the neighborhood politics, unlikely to know who to complain to or how. Linda hadn't chosen her targets randomly. She had selected homeowners who were isolated, transient, or vulnerable to doubt, people who wouldn't be around to catch her, and who wouldn't be believed if they tried to speak up. I searched the neighborhood's community page that night, looking for any prior mention of unauthorized entry. Most posts were routine lost pets, garage sales, complaints about speeding, but buried in a thread from 2 years ago, I found something. A woman had asked if anyone else had experienced the HOA entering their home without notice. The post had 3 comments before it was deleted. I couldn't see what they said, but I could see the replies referencing them. The original poster's account was gone. I took screenshots of what remained. The deletion happened less than 6 hours after the post went up. The page administrator at the time was a current board member. I updated the evidence folder, Jim's account, with the fake water damage notice, Megan's account, with the master key detail and the dismissed police report, the Sullivans' confirmation of the behavioral pattern, the deleted post and its timestamp. The comparison chart shows target selection criteria, 5 names, 5 timelines, one system designed to operate in silence. The next question was tactical. I had footage of Linda inside my home. I had witnesses willing to corroborate the pattern. I had documentation proving no legitimate inspection had occurred. But the moment I made a move, Linda would know someone was coming. She'd have time to coordinate with the board, backdate paperwork, and construct a defense. If I went to the police now, I risked getting the same response Megan got: civil matter. No evidence of theft. Case closed. I needed to control the timing. I needed her to respond before she knew how much I had. I closed the laptop and looked at the folder icon on my desktop. 5 families who'd been made to doubt their own perceptions. One woman who'd operated unchecked for years because no one had connected the dots. That was over now. I had the pattern documented. I had the witnesses lined up. I had the evidence organized and time-stamped. What I needed next was a move that would force Linda into the open, something that put her on record, something she couldn't walk back or explain away. I didn't have it yet, but I knew where to start looking. Tomorrow, I'd change every lock and access code on my property. I'd install additional cameras covering angles I'd missed, and I'd wait. Because if Linda had done this 5 times before, she wasn't going to stop. She was going to come back. And when she did, I'd be ready. I spent the next morning taking back control of my property. New deadbolt on the front door, new code on the garage keypad, 2 additional cameras covering the side gate and back patio, the angles I'd missed before. By noon, every possible entry point fed directly to my phone. If anyone set foot on my property, I'd know within seconds. The locksmith asked if I'd had a break-in. I told him I was being proactive. He didn't push. I sat at my kitchen table that afternoon with my laptop open, staring at a draft complaint to the county sheriff's office. Everything I had was documented footage, CC&R violations, missing reports, witness accounts. The question wasn't whether I had a case. The question was timing, file now, and Linda would know exactly who was coming and exactly what evidence existed. She'd have time to prepare, coordinate with the board, and maybe backdate the paperwork that should have been filed weeks ago. The police might still call it a civil matter. I'd have shown my hand for nothing. But waiting meant gambling on her returning. No guarantee she would. Every day I delayed was another day she could be covering tracks. Another day memories could fade. Waiting felt passive. It felt like giving her more time than she deserved.
Let me stop here for a second. A lot of people think justice means hitting back. But in situations like this, where the other person has a title, a board, and years of practice manipulating the system, emotion is exactly what they want from you. They want you to yell at a meeting so they can call you disruptive. They want you to confront them privately so they can claim harassment. The slow path feels wrong, but the slow path is how you build a case that can't be dismissed.
I made my decision that afternoon. I would prepare the complaint, but not file it yet. Everything would be ready: footage exports, CCNR analysis, witness statements, timeline. If Linda made another move, I'd have an updated file within hours. If she didn't, I'd file what I had after 30 days. Either way, I wasn't sitting idle. I was positioning. Some of you might be wondering about Bruno, 70 pounds of pit bull with a bark that sounds like a home invasion alarm. Why not let him roam the house if Linda came back? She'd get what she deserved. I thought about it. I won't pretend I didn't, but Bruno has been with me through the divorce, the move, the rebuilding of everything. He's family. And I wasn't going to risk his life because Linda Ashford decided my home was hers to inspect. He stayed in the bedroom when I was at work. If she came back and heard him barking, that was her problem. But I wasn't using my dog as a weapon. I also considered confronting her directly, walking up to her door, footage on my phone, demanding answers. It would feel good for 30 seconds. Then she'd have my face on her doorbell camera and a story about harassment. People like Linda don't get flustered by confrontation. They prepare for it. The only way to beat someone who controls the narrative is to build a record so complete that the narrative doesn't matter. I emailed a real estate attorney that evening, Robert Hayes, referred by a colleague. I gave him the summary and asked whether my evidence was sufficient for a criminal trespassing complaint. He responded the next morning. What I had was strong but not airtight. Video evidence of entry was clear. Lack of authorization was provable through the CCNR and management records. But a defense attorney could argue Linda believed she had implied consent through the inspection notice. His recommendation was obtain a written statement from the management company confirming no inspection was authorized, or wait for a second incident that would eliminate any ambiguity. A second incident. I read that phrase 3 times. I wasn't hoping Linda would come back. But somewhere in my gut, I knew she would. People who operate unchecked for years don't stop because one homeowner changes his locks. They get curious. They get territorial. They make mistakes. I closed the laptop and looked at Bruno, asleep on his bed in the corner. The house was quiet. The cameras were live. The evidence was organized. All I had to do now was wait and be ready for whatever came through that door next. 2 weeks passed. No sign of Linda on any of my cameras. No unusual activity at the house. I started to wonder if the new locks had been enough to make her lose interest. Then the letter arrived. It was sitting in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between a utility bill and a furniture catalog, official HOA letterhead, hand-delivered, no postage. I stood in my driveway and opened it, expecting another generic notice about lawn maintenance. What I found instead made me read it 3 times to make sure I understood. Notice of violation, my address, the date, and a single accusation: unauthorized pet breed restricted under community guidelines. The letter stated that during a routine property assessment, evidence of a restricted animal had been observed on the premises. 30 days to rehome the pet or submit an appeal. Failure to comply would result in escalating fines. At the bottom, Linda Ashford's signature. My first reaction was anger. She dared to threaten Bruno after what she'd done, but the anger faded quickly, replaced by something more useful. I went inside and started reading. I pulled up the CCNR on my laptop. Article 14 covered pet policies. The language was specific. Homeowners were permitted to keep domestic pets provided they did not exhibit aggressive behavior toward residents or guests. Noise complaints, waste disposal guidelines, standard provisions. But nowhere, not in a single line, did the document list restricted breeds. No mention of pit bulls, no mention of any specific type of dog. The only grounds for pet removal were documented incidents of aggression, and Bruno had none. No complaints on file, no incidents reported. Linda's violation notice cited a rule that didn't exist in the CC&R she was supposed to be enforcing. But the bigger issue was the date. The notice was dated 6 days after Linda's entry into my house. It referenced a routine property assessment as the source of information about Bruno. There had been no assessment, no report filed, no authorization documented. I pulled up the footage and compared timestamps. Linda paused outside my bedroom door at 2:24 in the afternoon. Bruno's barking was audible on the recording for the next 6 minutes. The violation notice referenced observed evidence from that same week. No neighbor had reported seeing Bruno. No one had filed a complaint. The timeline pointed to one conclusion: Linda had cited information she could only have obtained by standing inside my house. I called Robert Hayes that afternoon and read him the notice. He asked me to send a scan. 20 minutes later, he called back. "This is significant," he said. His voice was measured, careful not to overstate. The notice created a documentary link between Linda and the unauthorized entry. By citing a property assessment that was never authorized, she'd placed herself inside my home on a specific date. The footage confirmed her presence. The management company confirmed no inspection was scheduled, and now she'd created official correspondence referencing information she shouldn't have had access to. Hayes outlined the situation clearly. The notice strengthened my position, but it wasn't a guaranteed win. Linda could claim she'd received the information secondhand, a neighbor's report, a conversation she'd overheard. The footage showed her inside my house, but a defense attorney might argue she believed she had implied authority under the inspection notice. What I had was compelling. What I needed was her doubling down in a setting where her statements would be on record. He gave me 2 options: file the criminal complaint now and let the sheriff's office build its case, or attend the appeal hearing Linda had demanded and see what she said when confronted with questions she wasn't expecting. The first path was straightforward. The second was riskier, but if Linda repeated her claims in front of the board, with documentation proving otherwise, the case against her would expand beyond trespassing. That was fraud. Misrepresentation in an official capacity. I spent the evening organizing the evidence folder into its final form. Footage time-stamped and annotated, CC&R sections highlighted, management company confirmation, witness statements from Jim, Megan, and the Sullivans. And now the violation notice, the document Linda had written to pressure me into compliance, which had instead become a central piece of the case I was building. Every element is connected. Every timestamp is aligned. But Hayes had been clear connected wasn't the same as conclusive. Linda still had room to maneuver. The hearing would determine whether the room would be closed or stay open. I saved the folder and backed it up to 3 locations: cloud storage, external drive, and a copy emailed to Hayes. The appeal hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. I marked the date and started preparing the questions I wanted answered. Not accusations, questions. The kind that required specific responses. The kind that would be hard to walk back once they were on record. Linda thought she was putting me on defense with this violation notice. She thought threatening Bruno would make me scramble, maybe capitulate to avoid a fight. She didn't know about the cameras. She didn't know about the witnesses. And she didn't know that the letter she had sent had given me something I had been missing: her own words, on official letterhead, referencing an assessment that never happened. But I also knew this wasn't over. Linda had been doing this for years. She had relationships on the board, institutional knowledge, and experience controlling these situations. The hearing could go sideways in ways I couldn't predict. I had evidence. She had influence. The next 3 weeks would determine which one mattered more. If you've made it this far, there's something I want you to have. In the description below, I've linked a checklist: 10 things every homeowner should know about their rights versus their HOA's actual authority. Most people never read their CC&R. That's how people like Linda operate. Don't let that be you. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to think about something. When someone has spent years using procedure to control other people, using titles and paperwork,
confident posture to make others feel small. What do they do when someone finally asks them a simple question? The kind of question, that requires a simple answer. Do they get angry? Do they play the victim? Do they try to make it seem like a private matter that outsiders shouldn't be involved in? Think about it. Because their response isn't just emotion, it's evidence. And sometimes, a single moment of hesitation can unravel a story they've been building for years.
I didn't go to the appeal hearing. I went to the sheriff's office instead. The decision came 3 days before the scheduled board meeting. I'd spent 2 weeks preparing for that hearing, organizing documents, rehearsing questions, anticipating every deflection Linda might attempt. But the more I prepared, the more I realized I was playing her game. The HOA board wasn't a neutral body. 2 of the 5 members had served with Linda for over 4 years. The secretary, Carol Whitman, had co-signed half the violation notices in the neighborhood. Walking into that room with my evidence meant trusting people who had every reason to protect their president. Hayes agreed. The board isn't a court, he said. They're not obligated to be impartial. If you want this on record in a way that matters, take it to law enforcement. I filed the complaint on a Monday morning. Deputy Tom Bradley reviewed my documentation for 45 minutes without saying a word. The footage, the CCNR analysis, the management company's confirmation that no inspection had been authorized, the witness statements. And finally, the violation notice, Linda's own letter referencing information she could only have obtained through unauthorized entry. When he finished, he looked up and asked one question. "You're certain no one else had access to your home during this period?" I told him about the contractor code from the previous spring, the one I'd since changed. I told him the code had been submitted through HOA paperwork, which meant it had passed through their office. He nodded slowly and made a note. Then he asked if I'd be available that afternoon. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up to Linda's house at 4:15. I was already parked across the street, as Bradley had instructed, close enough to be present if needed, far enough to stay out of the initial conversation. The afternoon sun was sharp, and the street was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes every sound feel amplified. I watched Bradley walk up the driveway and ring the doorbell. 30 seconds passed, then Linda opened the door. She was dressed the way she'd been in my footage blazer, pressed slacks, the posture of someone who expected to be in control of whatever conversation was about to happen. I couldn't hear what Bradley said from where I sat, but I saw her expression shift, confusion first, then something tighter. She glanced past him toward the street, and for a moment her eyes found my car. I don't know if she recognized me, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. Bradley gestured toward the driveway, and after a pause, Linda stepped outside. They stood near the front walkway, Bradley with a folder in his hand, Linda with her arms crossed. He spoke for maybe 2 minutes. She listened without interrupting. Then he opened the folder and showed her something, a printout, probably a still from the footage. Her head tilted. She said something I couldn't hear. Bradley responded. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. He asked her a question. I knew what it was, because I'd heard him rehearse it in his office that morning. "Ma'am, do you have written authorization from the homeowner to enter this residence on this date?" Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the printout again, her arms uncrossed, then recrossed. She started to speak, stopped, and gestured toward her house as if the answer might be inside. Bradley waited. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10. When she finally responded, her voice was loud enough that I caught fragments through my open window. "HOA authority, inspection notice, misunderstanding." Bradley's reply was calm and flat. "Ma'am, the HOA's CCNR does not authorize interior inspections without written consent. The management company has no record of an authorized inspection on this date. I have video evidence of you inside this residence. Unless you can provide documentation showing you had permission to enter, this is a criminal matter." Linda tried again. Something about board responsibilities. Something about community safety. Bradley let her finish, then asked the same question a second time, slower. "Do you have written authorization, yes or no?" She didn't answer. Instead, she asked if this could be handled internally, through the HOA's dispute resolution process. Bradley shook his head. "Trespassing isn't a civil dispute," he said. "It's a crime." I watched her face change, The confidence that had carried her through 6 years of board meetings and violation letters and unchallenged authority, it cracked. Not dramatically. Not like in movies. Just a small fracture around the eyes. A slight drop in the shoulders. The look of someone realizing, for the first time, that the rules she'd bent for so long were about to bend back. Bradley handed her a citation. Trespassing, Class 1, misdemeanor. A court date was set for 6 weeks out. She took the paper without looking at it, her eyes still fixed on Bradley as if waiting for him to tell her this was all a mistake. He didn't. He thanked her for her time, returned to his cruiser, and drove away. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes, watching Linda stand alone on her driveway. She didn't go back inside immediately. She just stood there, holding the citation, staring at nothing. A neighbor walked by with a dog and waved. Linda didn't wave back. When she finally turned and went inside, she moved slowly, like someone carrying a weight she hadn't expected. I drove home and sat in my kitchen with Bruno at my feet. The citation was real. The court date was set. Linda Ashford, HOA president, rule enforcer, keeper of the clipboard, now had a criminal charge attached to her name. But I knew better than to think this was over. She still had allies on the board, she still had 6 weeks to build a defense, and she still had the kind of personality that didn't accept defeat quietly. The citation was a crack in her authority. Whether it became a collapse depended on what happened next. I emailed Hayes to update him, then I opened my evidence folder one more time, making sure every file was backed up, every timestamp verified. The next phase would be messier, court dates, possible counterclaims, board politics I couldn't predict. But for the first time since I'd watched Linda walk through my living room on a phone screen 1,000 miles away, the balance had shifted. She'd spent years asking questions no one could challenge. Now, she was the one who couldn't answer. 3 months later, it was over. Linda Ashford pleaded guilty to misdemeanor trespassing 2 weeks before her court date. No trial, no drawn-out legal battle. Her attorney advised her to take the deal rather than risk worse at trial, which, given the footage of her inside my home opening my filing cabinet, was the smart move. The sentence was 12 months probation, a $2,500 fine, and 40 hours of community service. Class 1 misdemeanor, permanently on her record. For a woman who had spent 6 years enforcing rules on everyone else, that record would follow her for the rest of her life. The HOA moved quickly. Word of the criminal charge spread through the neighborhood within days. An emergency board meeting was called 2 weeks after the citation. I attended. So did Jim Holloway, Megan Porter, and the Sullivans. 4 households, sitting in folding chairs in the community clubhouse, waiting to see what would happen next. Linda wasn't there. She had submitted her resignation by email the night before, effective immediately. The letter cited personal reasons. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no apology, just a quiet exit. Carol Whitman read the resignation aloud. No one clapped. No one said anything. The silence was its own verdict. A motion was introduced to amend the CC&R with a new right of entry policy. The language was specific. No board member could enter any private residence without prior written consent, delivered at least 72 hours in advance. Emergency access would require documented justification filed within 24 hours. Any violation would result in automatic removal from the board and referral to law enforcement. The motion passed with 78% of homeowner votes. The violation notice about Bruno was withdrawn without explanation. No apology, no acknowledgement that the accusation had been baseless. Just a quiet removal from my file. I didn't push for more. Bruno was safe. That was what mattered. He was sprawled on the living room floor when I got home from the meeting, tail thumping against the hardwood when he heard my keys. I knelt and let him press his head against my chest. "We're good," I told him. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. A few weeks later, I met Jim, Megan, and the Sullivans for coffee. First time all of us had been in the same room outside of official HOA business. Jim told stories about the neighborhood from 15 years ago, back when the HOA was just a formality and neighbors actually knew each other. Megan talked about finally feeling like she belonged somewhere. The Sullivans showed photos of their grandchildren. We didn't talk about Linda much. We didn't need to. What mattered was that we'd stopped being isolated targets. We were neighbors now. I still check my cameras every day, probably always will. The footage from Linda's entry is backed up in 3 places, and I'll keep it there indefinitely. Documentation is protection, records are power. I don't live in fear, but I live prepared. There's a difference. The house feels different now. For a while after the break-in, it felt contaminated, like someone had left fingerprints on every surface I couldn't wash off. That feeling faded, replaced by something quieter, ownership. Not just legal ownership, the kind that comes from defending something, from saying this is mine and making it stick. I bought this place after my divorce because I needed something that was just mine. Linda tried to take that from me. She walked through my home like it belonged to her, like I was just a guest in my own life. She was wrong, and now she knows it.
If you've made it this far, here's what I'll leave you with. A lot of people lose these battles because they're angry. Your anger is exactly what people like Linda want. It makes you the problem, while they play the victim. The alternative is slower. It means saving every email, documenting every conversation, building a case instead of winning an argument. Justice doesn't always come fast, but when you do it right, it comes cold, and it comes with receipts. Don't let anyone make you feel like a stranger in your own life. I'm Michael Vincent, and this has been Fallout HOA. If you've dealt with something similar, drop it in the comments. Not for drama, for data. One story can be dismissed. A pattern can't. Bruno says hi. Document everything, and don't let them see you sweat.
There's a story in our group that I'd like to share with you. Please listen and feel free to give your opinions. I'll play the role of the host. I'm honestly at my breaking point with my HOA and need to vent. Before I ever bought my condo, the unit had a fire, and the entire interior was rebuilt, including the flooring. I purchased the unit after the rebuild, assuming that anything reconstructed and approved at the time was compliant with HOA rules. Fast forward to now. The downstairs neighbor has started constantly complaining about noise and has escalated to harassing my tenant directly. Instead of addressing that, the HOA decided the issue must be my flooring. For context, there is no management company. The HOA board is 3 people, and they fired the management company because they didn't like how much money was being spent. In reality, the HOA is basically being run by one person, while the other 2 board members are largely inactive, before any formal letter or process. One board member told me he wanted to come into my unit by himself and remove my flooring to send it out for testing. He is not a licensed contractor. He is not insured. I told him no. Shortly after that, the HOA started fining me $500 every single month until I fixed the flooring. The rule they're citing says that wood or simulated wood flooring installations on the 2nd and 3rd floor are not permitted unless the owner demonstrates that the final floor assembly meets or exceeds a sound transmission class STC rating of 60 or above. I've tried to be cooperative. I contacted the restoration company that rebuilt the unit to get documentation on the flooring materials and STC rating. They told me they switched systems since the rebuild and no longer have that information. The HOA claims the previous management company won't provide any rebuild documentation and hasn't responded to them. So, instead of resolving that internally, they're dumping the entire situation on me, even though I wasn't the owner during the fire, rebuild, or approvals. Now they've sent me a formal agreement requiring me to hire and pay for my own licensed contractor, remove sections of flooring in at least 2 rooms, allow an HOA board member to be present, and hand over the removed flooring materials for sound testing. Every cost is on me, including removal, repair, replacement, and restoration. So, I'm being fined monthly over flooring that was installed before I owned the unit, based on complaints from one neighbor, by an HOA with no management, effectively run by one person, who first tried to personally rip up my floors and is now forcing me to pay thousands to prove compliance. This whole thing feels less like enforcement and more like retaliation mixed with incompetence. Not sure what to do here, or if what they're doing is even legal. TLDR, my condo was rebuilt after a fire before I bought it. Downstairs, neighbor complains about noise and harasses my tenant. HOA has no management company and is basically run by one board member. That person tried to personally remove my flooring for testing, even though he's not licensed. I said no, and the HOA started fining me $500 a month. They can't get rebuild records from the old management or restoration company. So now they want me to pay to tear up my floors in multiple rooms to prove they meet a 60 STC rule, even though the flooring was installed before I owned the unit.
Honestly, I really feel for you in this situation. Hardships. You did everything a reasonable owner should do. Buying in good faith, trying to cooperate, reaching out for documentation, and communicating clearly. Yet you're being met with pressure and punishment instead of solutions. Being stuck between a dysfunctional HOA and a hostile neighbor is incredibly draining, especially when you're being held responsible for decisions made long before you owned the unit. The most frustrating part is knowing you didn't do anything wrong, yet you're still paying the price for other people's incompetence and power struggles. Situations like this don't just cost money. They slowly wear you down emotionally. I really hope you're able to find a fair resolution.